Welcome to Dark Conduit, where shadows whisper and the unseen is brought into the eerie light of your screen. Here, we delve into the depths of horror and suspense, narrating tales that will chill your spine and haunt your dreams. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. Welcome to the nightmare.
We're thrilled to have you.
That time, we had to use our code word. It was 2012, and my best friend Hannah had convinced me to join her on a weekend trip up north. She had, after searching for the longest time, found her dream car and was planning on traveling the 900 kilometers to the very north of Sweden to buy it. It was a second-hand two-door Suzuki Vitara in a purple-ish kind of color, and I must admit I didn't share her obsession with it. But, with her being the closest thing to a sister that I will ever get, I was happy to join her nonetheless. Hannah and I have always had each other, from the cradle and onwards. Sharing each other's love for adventure, we have traveled the world together. At the time this happened, we were both 21 and had recently returned from a trip in Asia. The man who was selling her the car had agreed to meet us at the small airport in Umeå. When we arrived shortly before lunchtime, it had started to snow heavily. The first snow of the season, no less. The parking lot was almost empty, and when I saw the man standing outside the Vitara, I felt immediately concerned. He was dressed like a hunter. A lot of people in this area of the country live a lifestyle with hunting and fishing, so nothing strange with that, really. But still, there was something about him that made me uneasy. He was nice, though, smiling and waving to us, shaking hands with us both before walking us around the car and pointing out all the tiny little flaws. He showed us the work he had done on the car and showed the paperwork from the recently done engine repairs. He made the impression that he didn't want to hide anything. On the contrary, he made a show out of being very forthcoming and honest. The snowing had now intensified and we were getting cold. He opened the car door for us and said, "I got the paperwork at home. Let's close the deal over some coffee." Against all my instincts, I climbed in after Hannah, both of us now trapped in the back seat. I had no reason to feel threatened by this man who had been nothing but pleasant to us, other than the alarm bells going off inside my head. I can't tell what it was that made me feel that way, but there must have been some sign that something was wrong. Something that my subconscious tuned into. The man was constantly talking, funny, since people from the north of Scandinavia are famous for never speaking a word more than absolutely necessary. He showed the stereo, told us about the features of the car, about the places we drove past, about the wildlife and the nature. There was not a silent moment. After about 20 minutes, I started to notice that we were in no way moving in the direction of civilization. Instead, it seemed we were driving further and further into the vast wilderness. It struck me that he had us in the back of a two-door car, diving us into unknown territory, and no one knew where we were. I looked at Hannah, who was happily listening to the man telling stories about the area, and I noticed she didn't look at all worried. Maybe I was totally overreacting. We drove past a group of people standing by the side of the road, hunters planning their day, or taking a break maybe. This truly is a very different Sweden compared to the city. The car finally stopped outside a small wooden cottage with no neighboring houses, apart from a small cabin that we drove past a few hundred meters down the road, but it had looked empty. We followed the man inside. He was still talking non-stop and continued to do so until the moment the door closed behind us. Hannah kept asking things about the car, and I could sense that her voice had a new undertone now, a thin, sharp tenseness that made me wonder if she too had started to feel that something wasn't right. "I'll put the kettle on," he said, and as he passed us to go into the kitchen, he let his hand touch Hannah's hair, and he smiled smugly. "May I use the bathroom?" I asked politely, and made my way to the door with the little red heart on. I was washing my hands when I saw something in the stained bathroom mirror. Something was hidden behind the water cistern. I pulled out a rolled-up plastic folder, and as I turned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. It was very violent porn pictures that looked like they'd been cut out from magazines, and they were glued to the paper, surrounded by cut-out pieces of handwritten text. Put together, it made a horrifying story about how a woman was lured into a car with the promise of getting to buy the car cheaply, and then it quickly turned into a horror story. I know this will sound silly, but when we traveled together, Hannah and I had a code word for whenever we felt it was time to get out of a situation. We had never needed to use it, just joked about it, but now it came in handy. I walked out of the bathroom and looked at Hannah and said, "Potatoes. We forgot to buy potatoes, and that's too bad, because good God, do we need some." The look on my face must have told her that the situation was no joke, and she said, "Oh, should we get some as soon as possible?" "The sooner the better," I replied. Hannah, always pretty and charming and capable of great acting, casually walked over to the man in the kitchen, tapped his shoulder and said, "Excuse me, but I was wondering if I can go have a quick look at the cam belt." He huffed something about it being in good shape and handed over the keys. We got into the car and speeded off faster than the weather, strictly speaking, allowed. We left the car at the airport and hoped we hadn't made a terrible mistake. What if he reported it stolen? It would be embarrassing to explain to the police. But nothing happened. He didn't follow us, didn't report it in. We had to take the train since we had no plane tickets. The original plan had been to take the car home, and we didn't want to linger close to the airport in case he came looking for us. Later, Hannah asked what made me use the code word, and I told her about what I had found. It might just have been a fantasy, a sick game, and maybe he would never have done anything to us. But right then and there, I was convinced we would die if we didn't get out. Thank God, Hannah didn't need any convincing or proof, just the code word. I truly think that if we hadn't talked about it so many times before, about how we would handle a situation where we need to get out fast, things would have ended differently. Both of us knew that if either ever used the code word, it's time to get out. No questions asked. Just move. We never made it inside. I have been a long-time reader and decided to make an account to share this story with all of you. Not simply because it has stuck with me, but because I'm sure that you will have a few great hypotheses about what happened to me that night and who it was exactly that I encountered. It started several years ago, my and my friend's interest in urban exploration. I was a junior in high school at the time, which was when everyone started to earn a lot more freedom, so we took the chance to be out late whenever we could. Now, keep in mind that I live in a major city in central Colorado, so the nightlife is never lacking. We could always find something to do, and were especially drawn if there was an element of danger. We wouldn't always plan these trips, but we made sure as hell that if we were going into any old building in the dark, we would have a knife and a flashlight for safety. We never really had to defend ourselves, but we came very close one evening. It must have been around November because there wasn't yet snow on the ground, but it was a chilly evening. Directly across the street from the abandoned hospital, which we have hypothesized is still around from the TB era, is a hospital that is newer and in use. The two are connected by an underground tunnel, which I can only assume was a way to move bodies without alerting the patients. This is a common feature among old hospitals. We had been inside the hospital a few times, but never found anything strange, only the occasional sign of others having been or lived there. What was piquing our interest that night was the abandoned library next door to that hospital. It was connected, but only by exterior walls. To get inside, you could not cut through the hospital, but instead had to hop over a tall wall and climb a very high fence. A few of us had backpacks containing the aforementioned safety precautions and a couple bottles of water, so nothing too heavy or valuable that would get damaged when tossed over the obstacles before us. A little ways off the road, it was dark if you clung to the buildings. We did for a while before stepping behind a small patch of shrubbery, which we determined was an easy way over the first wall, since the only other way to gain access was by a chained, unclimbable gate at the bottom of a set of stairs facing away from the ledge. Both were parallel with the library, so when tucked back in that corner behind the bushes, no one could see us from the street. I don't believe I went first, but I did not remain behind to be last over that wall. It was too high up for me to jump and haul myself over, so I resorted to stepping on a pipe jutting out somewhere lower along the wall. It gave me a bit of a needed boost, and soon I was up and over, moving into the library's courtyard. Another girl and I waited for our two other girlfriends to join us. Upon an initial glance over of the courtyard, there was no obvious way in. To our right was a dilapidated fountain, which I took joy in imagining spring forward a spray of water from its detailed stonework in the brighter summer months, people laughing and talking with the surrounding trees bringing them shade. Now, however, it had been in long disuse, and the earth at our feet was cold and hard. There were no signs of another soul for years, save the 15-foot chain-link fence directly in front of us, separating the courtyard in half. I could tell it hadn't seen the same weather as the rest of the courtyard, because the metal showed no signs of rust. That must be our way in, we agreed, because with a fence like that, someone obviously wanted to keep us out. We hurled our bags over the fence, hearing them clank on the ground rather silently due to their lightness. I was the third over, because I have a slight fear of climbing, and it took me a bit to mentally prepare myself. I made it to the top of the fence in short time, then sat at top straddling it with a leg on either side. I had two girls on the other side in front of me, and one behind me who was telling me to hurry up. I spent a good couple minutes up there, doing another mental preparation and some deep breathing, then climbed down to wait for the last girl. At the time, I was thinking that had been one of the scariest things I've done in a while, because I tend to avoid climbing at all costs. Of course, this is an irrational fear, as I have never fallen, but that phobic fear didn't even compare to what happened next. The last girl's feet hit the ground, and all four of us split up in the smaller half of the courtyard, looking for any kind of entrance. We decided that breaking a window would be too loud and draw unwanted attention, not to mention we could get really cut up. So, that wasn't an option. Searching for a little longer, we didn't find anything that looked remotely plausible until we found a grate near the base of where two walls met. I couldn't believe we hadn't noticed it before, and upon closer inspection, the grate was already moved slightly from its resting place, so it would be easy to lift the rest of the way. The smallest and least fearful of our group went first. After moving the grate, there was a small drop down. It was no more than 3 feet down and 2 feet wide, but inside there was another drop down where we could see into the library basement. She hopped down into the small square landing, only to almost immediately freeze. We looked amongst ourselves, wondering what was wrong. "There's a guy down there," she said. "What? Where?" "I can see his outline," she said. I leaned forward and tried to make out a shape, but it was further down than my line of sight permitted and too dark. "Hello," she called out. He responded the same, asking who we were. "Just a couple of chicks," she spat out bluntly. What he said next sent chills down my spine, and it was as if I could feel the darkness radiating out of that hole in the ground. All of a sudden, it was very still and quiet, like that darkness had spilled out and weighed all of us down in that gloomy courtyard. He said in what I can only describe as a lustful tone, dripping with ill intent, "I'm addicted to following the sound of women's voices." My friend looked over at us blankly, but there was nervousness underneath, unease. Something in his voice sounded like it wasn't an empty threat, like he wasn't just saying something creepy to get us to leave. She looked back to where he was and said lowly, "That's not cool." The man under that dark earth began laughing maniacally, and not in the kind of way a really good actor does. In the way that we could feel his utter insanity hit us like stale air. We looked at each other for what felt like hours in that gloomy courtyard, but I knew it was only a couple of seconds, because we all exchanged without even speaking that we had to get out of there. And now, I was not about to risk some nutcase coming after us, even if we did outnumber him. The friend scrambled up out of the landing, and I was never over a fence faster in my life. 15-foot potential fall, and I didn't even have time to think about it. We didn't stop running until we were on the street and halfway down the block, out of breath. I can still hear that laugh. "So, guy in a storm drain, let's not meet." As our journey through the shadows comes to a close, we want to extend a heartfelt thank you for watching. Your presence illuminates the darkest corners of our tales, and it's you, our brave viewers, who make Dark Conduit truly alive. Remember, if tonight's tale has left a whisper in your ear or a shadow in your heart, support us by hitting that like button and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Every like, comment, and share helps us keep the lanterns burning and the stories flowing. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to become a permanent traveler in our eerie adventures. Until next time, keep the lights dim and your curiosity alight. Thank you, and good night from Dark Conduit.